Well, good morning, everybody. So good to be with you this morning. This gorgeous, gorgeous weather we have. Just a couple of announcements before we get into our message this morning. Got a horrible email yesterday from Shla and Emmanuel. Yes, Shla, you can hide your face in shame to say they are going to be leaving us. They are immigrating to the USA. So this is what I want you all to do. Just shun them. Okay. No, not at all. We're going to miss you so much. You guys have meant a lot to our church family. And we pray God's blessing on you in the UK. I know you'll hold the Lord's name up high over there. Folks, please don't forget to speak to Clyde Men. 20th is our men's breakfast. Go and give Clyde your 60 Rand. In fact, give him 120 and then bring a friend with. We're really looking forward to that. 27th of this month, we've got a sing-song right here, sing-song and supper. We're going to be learning some new songs. Tony's going to be helping us. Cody's going to be helping us. And we're inviting some of the other congregations around. Looking forward to that. We've also got plans for a seniors deal coming up, a ladies' craft thing. So there's a lot of stuff going on. We've got George Funk going to be with us on the 9th of June. A lot of stuff going on, and really looking forward to this busy time. I want to show you a picture this morning to start off with. And I want you to look at that picture and tell me what every one of these guys have in common. Of course, you know Chad Leclos on your left, South African Durban boy guy just up the road, world record, multiple world record holder in the swimming pool. Gold medals, more than you can count. Then there's Michael Phelps from the USA, also probably one of the greatest swimmers that have ever lived. And then on the far side is Ian Thorpe, the Australian great. I wonder if you know what they all have in common. What they have in common with many other sports people is they all suffer from mental health. Every one of these great sportsmen have been through major bouts of depression and anxiety. In fact, each one of those guys has had to take time out from swimming to be able to get help and recover from their mental health issues. And so, you know I love sport, and I'm absolutely surprised, maybe I shouldn't be, at the number of top sports people who have struggled with mental health. But not only sports people, actors, actresses, business people, medical professionals, and of course just normal people like you and I. Let me show you this next guy up here. For those of, I hope you can see that is Johnny Wilkinson, arguably the greatest fly half in rugby history. Oh, that's apart from Nas, of course. Okay, we'll claim Nas. He's an Englishman, so we'll just claim Nas. But he said it took a few years for the pressure to really build, and then it exploded. Johnny Wilkinson, England's World Cup winning fly half, speaks about the battle with mental illness and why no amount of trophies can ease the pain of depression. This is amazing this week. I really just spent quite a bit of time on the net, and I could give you so many examples. Of course, he's started podcasts, he's written a bunch of stuff on it, and he's helping a lot of other people who have gone through mental illness. Let me show you two more. Do you know this next guy? Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, great football player when he was younger, and then he got on to WWE, and he was the people's hero, and then now, of course, he's a very accomplished actor, and he's opened up about his depression, and he said he's battled the beast more than once. And he writes about how he often cried himself to sleep. And when we look at Chad Leclos, and when we look at Johnny Wilkinson, and when we look at Dwayne, when we look at The Rock, These don't look like people who suffer from mental illness, because there's always a smile on the face as it has happened. Let me show you one more. You'll know this face. This is Martin Luther King. The civil rights leader. He experienced severe depression episodes well into adulthood following 2 reported suicide attempts. You probably will not be shocked to hear that it said that a quarter of the American presidents suffered from mental illnesses, 27% of them, while they were in office. Folks, we need to talk about dealing with mental health issues. The good news is that people who come out and talk about their mental health issues are being affirmed these days. And this certainly was not the case when I was growing up. You know, back in the day, you just suck it up. Real men didn't talk about their struggles with mental health. And we have become a safer place where people can talk about struggles with mental health issues. And I want to say to you this morning, the church needs to join and lead in this conversation because it is real. Because we as a church, we have a perspective that offers much people need to hear. You know, and previously, if you remember, I preached a series of sermons called Is It Well With Your Soul? And I really wish I had got this sermon together for that part. In fact, Diane put me onto this topic, and she had listened to something on the web. She said, listen, you need to talk about this. And I listened to that, and so that's why I'm sharing this with you this morning. You know, one of the ways that an unwell soul manifests itself is through mental health challenges. And we need to talk about mental health. So if you struggle with this morning, please grant me some grace. Hopefully I'll be able to say something of benefit to you. I want to categorically say I'm not an expert. But my intention, hopefully this morning, is to lessen the burden that you carry and not increase it. My intention is maybe to speak about some ideas and really just shed light on the subject. And hopefully these ideas will assist you with the struggle of a very real thing. Now, what we could do is we could just keep this topic in the dark. But nothing gets better in the dark. This is Satan's strategy. God brings things into the light. So let's have a conversation about mental health. You know, the struggle with mental health, I'll say again, it is real. Mental health disorders are now the leading cause of disability worldwide. About 20% of adults experience a mental health challenge every year. 20%, that's 1 in 5. So that means people who are listening to me right now, maybe some of you have had a mental health challenge in the last 12 months. And if you haven't had one, there's a good chance that a mental health challenge is coming up. You know, this was not created by COVID, but certainly that COVID epidemic exacerbated the problem. Rates of anxiety and depression have increased 25% since 2020. That's absolutely massive. Now, folks, listen to this. This is really important because the statistics for South Africa are even more alarming. Of 34 countries surveyed last year, South Africa had the worst MHQ, the mental health quotient. 34 countries, South Africa is the worst. And I can begin to imagine that because, boy, we have suffered a lot. You know, if it's not the floods, if it's not the load shedding, if it's not the looting, then it's our horrific unemployment matters. And then if that's not, then it's the rampant corruption. We deal with so much. No wonder we are struggling, and we are the worst in 34 countries. 1 in 6 South Africans suffer from anxiety, depression, or substance abuse disorder. 41%, that's 18 out of 24. That's close on 50 pence. 1 out of 2 of 18 to 24-year-olds are deemed to be within the stress and struggling range. 25.7% of South Africans are depressed, says Dr. Ashley Craig of the Wits Medical Research Team. I read his research, and it's quite staggering, the stuff that he has uncovered. 20% of teenagers, 1 in 5, have a mental disorder, but only 1/3 of them get the help they needed. And let me give you one last statistic, because I'm sure if you weren't depressed before hearing this, you are now. That's 62%, that's well over half of our university graduates report feeling overwhelmed and anxious. The question is mental health nurture or is it nature? Nurture being, how we were brought up, or it's nature, the environment we are living in. And of course, the experts say, yes, it's both. Both our biology and our environment, they're both broken by sin. And mental health issues can be rooted in many things, like our physiology. We can have a genetic predisposition to certain types of mental issues. It can be in our genes. We can have chemical imbalances in the brain that can be a great factor in our mental health struggles. You can take medication that could be normal for everybody else, and all of a sudden for you, it flips your character, and all of a sudden you struggle with mental health issues. Then, of course, there is the relational stress. Some people grow up in very toxic family systems. And when you have grown up in a family where you are constantly rejected, constantly criticized, it's hard not to have a brain that flips to anxiety and depression and to all these other things. Folks, then there is life experiences. No one gets out of this life having had an easy life. It's just like a treadmill life with no problems. But some people have it particularly hard. Many people have been wounded by trauma. We have relationship trauma. There's deaths in our families. There's medical traumas. There's the cancers. All of these things. And if you've been a victim of trauma, you know that the impact of that lasts a lot longer than the initial trauma itself. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a very real thing. One factor, can I add to all of this, that can cause a mental health issue is a disconnection from God. Now, hear me clearly this morning. It's not the only factor, but it certainly can be a factor. Remember the story of David, who had an affair with his friend's wife. He then had his friend murdered, and he kept it in the dark. He became disconnected from God. Later, he reflects in the Psalm 32 and verse 3. When I kept things to myself, I felt weak. I felt weak deep inside me. I moaned all the day long. This is not a person who's having a great time in life. This is not a person who's not struggling with a mental thing. David had a year of deep mental anguish because he had lost his connection with God. So being disconnected from God could be a factor in some people's mental issues. But let me say this very soon after what I've just said. If you are having a mental issue, it does not mean you are not a spiritual person. You can be absolutely connected to God and still have a mental health issue. Anxiety, depression, burnout, and stress are real for many great spiritual men and women. Nobody's mental health challenge you'll know, is their challenge alone, because it affects our co-workers. It impacts on our colleagues and our friends and our husbands and our wives. It affects our marriages, affects our church as well. Mental health challenges, church, are very real. This is the reason we have to have this conversation. Not talking about it is not working. Not talking about it, just trying to hide it, just is not working. It's like you can take a kipper and you can hide it in the air conditioning duct of your car. You can't see it. But the evidence is overwhelming that something's not great there. Note this very disconcerting fact. The average person struggling with a mental health issue will wait 10 years before they admit it and get help. That is a staggering thought. We've got to bring this conversation out of the dark and into the light like the Bible does. You know, the Bible is very honest about mental health issues. Over 50% of David's Psalms expressed grief and sorrow. David dealt with depression much of his adult life, and yet God called him a man after his own heart. Let me show you just a couple of verses. Psalm 6 and verse 6. I am worn out from sobbing. All night I flood my bed with weeping, drenching it with my tears. You been there? David had been there. Psalm 13 and verse 2. I'm reading from the New Living Translation, by the way, in these scriptures. How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart every day? Psalm 69, 2 and 3. Deeper and deeper I sink into the mire. I can't find a foothold. I am in deep water, and the floods overwhelm me. I hope some of you are encouraged by seeing those words. Maybe some of you didn't realize that the Bible was honest about talking about mental health issues and challenges. Great people of faith were honest about their mental health. David never tried to hide his depression from God. The Bible doesn't deny faith heroes of faith. Even the ones that you're reading about in Hebrews chapter 11, many of them struggled with mental health challenges. Look at Jacob, who suffered, looks like, from PTSD. You know, when Joseph was taken and was reported him that Joseph died, man, it was 4 decades. He struggled with the grief of his son. How about Elijah, who was on the run from Ahab and Jezebel for years? He finally breaks down and he says to God, take my life. This is the great man, Elijah. How about Paul, who wrote to the church in Corinth, and he said to him how beaten down he was from his trip and his journeys through Asia. Paul used the word to describe himself, overwhelmed and crushed. The gospel writers do not hide the fact that even Jesus confessed his increasing mental anguish as he got closer to the cross. I'm going to read from you Isaiah chapter 53. It's not on your screens. I chose to leave it off. Just listen to these words. This is the prophecy of Jesus. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And like one from whom men hide their face, he was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastising of our well-being fell upon him. By his scourging we are healed. And we could read on and on. It's not a sin to deal with mental distress. A couple of things this morning I want to share with you. Number one, it's important that we do not stigmatize having mental health challenges, because no one chooses to struggle with a mental health issue. No one says, oh, that would be a good thing to do. No one chooses to struggle with mental health. And that truth alone should expel our spirit of judgment that has existed far too long. And church, listen to this. No way does a struggle below the neck warrant more attention than a struggle above the neck. You know, when we struggle with health issues, we go to a doctor. But how come we're so less likely to get help when we have a struggle above the neck? Hopefully this will stop us from trivializing or spiritualizing someone's mental health issues. You know, just to say, get over it, just suck it up, is so the wrong way to approach this issue. Yeah, just look on the bright side. You know, you need to have more faith. The problem is you're just not praying enough. So better for us as fellow strugglers in this world to say, I'm sorry to hear that. How can I help? Number two, before we get to number two, let me just show you Galatians chapter 6 and verse 2. Share each other's burdens, says the Apostle Paul. In this way you obey the law of Christ. Pointing fingers is not obeying the law of Christ. Sharing burdens is the way to obey the law of Christ. The goal is not to be a burden-free church, but to be a church where we can share one another's burdens. We do this, but we do not stigmatize mental health issues. Number two, it's important that we as a church family extend grace to fellow sufferers. Because despite what we all like to believe, no one in the church is completely fine. No one. Not even your preacher is completely fine. We all struggle. And we come in the door and we say, how are you doing? I'm fine. And so we're 150 people of I'm fines. But everybody struggles somewhere along the line. And the church is really a community where we can offer people real help with their real problems. We do this by being in the presence of Christ and supporting one another. You know, I don't understand everything that you are going through. And neither do you understand everything that I have to deal with. But we do have to understand that but we don't have to understand everything in order for us to stand together. Romans chapter 12 and verse 15 and verse 16. Be happy with those who are happy. We weep with those who weep. We rejoice with those who rejoice, and we weep with those who rejoice. We live in harmony with each other. And together we remind each other of how much we all need Jesus. Number three, it's important that we take steps towards hope and faith and health. You and I are created in the image of God, which means we have the capacity to achieve wellness. Wellness is an approach to life. And there are some steps we can take towards achieving this wellness, and I just want to share with them in a short time that we have left this morning. Number one, see a doctor, take medicine. See a doctor, take medicine. You do not get a trophy put on your coffin if you lived your entire life and you never took medicine. There are no trophies for that. If you need to, see a doctor, and if you need to, take some medicine. Doctors and medicine are gifts from God. And if you're struggling with a mental health issue, if you're struggling with stuff, go see a doctor. Go you see your doctor. He can do tests, and sometimes it's just, our bloods, our chemistry is, sometimes it's out of whack. And they can definitely help. Not only see a doctor, take medicine, see a counselor if you need to. Seeing a counselor does not mean you are weak. It means you are strong. You've taken this decision. I need help with this. Just like you're an idiot if you try to lift a cupboard by yourself. Get some help lifting that cupboard. If you're struggling with your mental health, see a doctor. See a counselor. Number 3, I've just stuck it up there. Watch your intake. Folks, not only your physical intake, what we eat, because that can affect us as well, but our media intake. What we watch on TV, and what we watch on the internet, and what we watch on social media. The screens that we are so addicted to can have a devastating impact on our health. Our souls cannot do life at the speed of our cell phones. Sometimes we just need to take a timeout. Let me give you another one. Get some sleep. Get some sleep. The data is conclusive. We are not getting enough sleep. I told you in the days before electricity, which we are heading towards, so you've got good news coming up. The average amount a person was getting 11 hours of sleep a night. Folks, some of us are we're running on fumes. And our bodies and our minds, our souls are just not getting recharged enough. There is a direct correlation between the amount of sleep you get and your mental health. God did not create the late show. Get some sleep. Switch off the devices, put the TV off, and get some sleep. Here's another one. Go outside. Get more exercise. Study after study has shown that 15 minutes, 5, 10, 15 minutes of sunlight on your face a day will have make a dramatic improvement on your well-being, on your mental well-being. And there's far more qualified people to talk about that. But we know outside when you get sun, all the melanin and all these other things, it just makes you feel wonderful. And folks, let me encourage you, get some exercise. Unfortunately, we've become the sedentary thing. Unfortunately, we have become also an indoor people. Because indoors, we've got the air cons and the fans and the lights and everything, the climate control. We're not outdoor anymore. And you know what? Our mental health is just here. Get outside. Do some exercise. Get some sun. This is especially true for our children. In one generation, our children have gone from a play-based culture to a screen-based culture, and it is having a devastating impact on their lives. Let's talk about 2 more. Choose community. Choose community. This is not so easy when you're not feeling good, because really what you want to do is when you have a mental health, you want to withdraw. But you know what? There is no therapist in the world, Christian or non-Christian, that will say that's the right thing to do. They will all say you need to be with people when you are struggling with a mental illness. Isolation is the worst thing that you can possibly do. Why do you think the Bible says, do not neglect to meet together? It's important that we get together. And research shows, many research papers have shown that people who attend worship services together have significant lower levels of mental health issues than people who don't. And by the way, this doesn't apply to people who watch online, because there's something special when we get together. That's why as song leaders, sometimes we struggle to get everybody settled. Everybody, how are you doing? The hugs and the hellos and the coffee and the chats have significant benefits for our mental well-being. And the last one I want to share with you is this: practice spiritual disciplines. Your prayer life, your Bible reading, your worship, these are critical for the child of God when it comes to spiritual wellness. And they help us to beat back those mental challenges that all of us will have sometime or other. In conclusion, you cannot help me bear what I'm not willing to share. You cannot help me bear what I'm not willing to share. We need to stop hiding these things in the darkness and talk them about them, and we can encourage one another as we see the day drawing near. It's the Sabbath, and Jesus is in the synagogue. There's a man there with a withered hand. And Jesus had him stand up in front of everybody. And then he said to him, "Stretch out your hand." You know, you can't hide a withered leg, you can't hide a blind eye, but a withered hand, like many of us, we're hiding withered stuff. And Jesus said, "You stand up," probably the very last thing that he wanted to do. Said, "You stretch out your hand." Everybody in the synagogue got their eyes fixed on a man with a struggle. Jesus healed him that day. I really want to encourage you this morning. If you're struggling with a mental health issue, don't hide it. Get help. Get it out in the open, even if it's just to a professional, your doctor, a counselor. Do these other things. I pray God's blessing on you as we all struggle with these things. Let's stand together as we sing.